Hello, everyone. Hi, hi, hi. So just a heads up, this is going to be a conversation in English. So for those who have joined us in the past, this is a new one, a special one. So we hope you enjoy it. And we're waiting for
Hello.
Naveed.
Can you
Hi.
can
I
you
don't
see me? I'm here.
hear you. Oh, you're there. I can hear you, but I don't see you. So
Ah,
let's figure this thing.
right.
We've been having some issues over here. Technology is not our friend. What happens if I take my camera off? Nothing.
Well, I can see you basically. I mean, I can't see you now, but I can see myself on screen.
It's yourself.
Hola, Dario.
Uh,
Good to see a message from Dario. Good to see.
if any of our friends in live can give us any ideas. Oh, it seems like it's only me. That's a
Oh, okay, great.
it's
That's
sad for me.
something. That's something.
I think I'm gonna have a second phone with me, with the two of us. And the only resolving camera, but that's better than nothing. Okay, hello everyone. Hi Naveed. Such a pleasure to have you here. Tell us, where are you right now?
I am
You-
right now in Ireland, in Republic of Ireland, and I'm here for a film project uh, which is looking at fishing cultures and how the ideas of hyperlocal ideas of climate, hyperlocal ideas of tradition, all of that is sort of interplaying with traditions that I see back home in India. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to see how, again, connections of traditions, connections of culture, um, erasing all of the ideas that we have as borders of how we recognize connections that we have to each other. It's
Mhm.
something that I'm exploring here in Ireland.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see lots of connections with your work in Garzon in Uruguay at the Campo residency. So we're gonna dive into it. For those who are watching, thank you so much for joining today. This is Campo Conversations, a series of conversations with past Campo Artfest and Campo Air artists, in which we discuss topics surrounding nature, ancestry, land, water, and also this year's theme, which is migration and movement, unsettled, which we'll be discussing in some conversations to come. And we have Naveed with us. Naveed is an Indian artist from Bangalore, who was part of the October residency in 2023. And he did an amazing work with the kids at the Garzon School, which we'll be discussing. But first, I want to do a more formal introduction. So I'm going to read you a little bit of his bio, and then we can chat a little more. Okay, Naveed Mulki started his career in advertising soon moved on to telling untold stories for a magazine called Untold and creating short documentaries for the film collective he co-founded called Faraway Originals. In recent years, he made the leap to independent cinematography and direction. His films so far have addressed issues such as conservation, diversity, and human interest portraits. Okay, thank you for being here with us. I'm watching you a little bit on the right and also here, moving my head a lot in this talk. Um, Naveed, let's start with arriving to Uruguay. So this is your first experience. This was your first experience in the country, in Latin America, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
So
right.
let's talk about a little bit about that experience, that change in the territory and in culture, and what struck you the most when you arrived.
I think it was interesting for me because I think the first thing that struck me about Uruguay was its Garzón especially was its silence, you know. So for me, I did coming from India and all of my work is in South Asia, Southeast Asia. So to sort of sort of feel that sort of silence, you know, that sort of, I mean, I couldn't smell Uruguay. I couldn't sense Uruguay in a way that it sort of hits me in India, or sort of hits me in Southeast Asia or the other places I usually operate in.
Mm-hmm.
So in Uruguay, it was sort of the stillness of it was sort of challenging at first. There was no place to hide for me. It was sort of easy to sort of, otherwise you're in India, you have so many things happening, so many stimulants
Mm-hmm.
that I feel I can sort of hide in between all of those things. But
Mm-hmm.
in Uruguay, what happened was that I was sort of confronted with myself because of the
Mm-hmm.
stillness, because of the sort of attention to solitude that Uruguay has, which I sort of grew very fond of by the time I left in 2 months, because I really appreciated how solitude was a thing that everyone appreciated in Uruguay. Like
Mm-hmm.
even in going to a park and sitting alone during lunch break is something alien to me in India. I don't really get to do that. If I'm in the park sitting alone, within 30 seconds, I'm in a conversation about my family with a stranger,
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it usually plays out in India. But here there was an attention to solitude, there was a silence that I appreciated. So that was my first instinct when I came to Uruguay. And of course, that sort of compounded in Garçon.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we have talked about that softer side of Uruguay, that nothing is too aggressive, not even the sounds, not even the smell. And so it is a change of rhythm. And so you found yourself in a space that allowed you to connect with yourself, that sometimes can be a little new and unexpected. But from that experience came your beautiful things, and also um, with the cohort that you later came to meet. This was a residency with 4 more other artists in October of last year. All of them amazing people that bonded together beautifully. And so tell us about how was going from the solitude of the first days and then working together as a group and getting to know each other.
I think it was my first experience as a residency, as an artist residency. I've never been in a residency before. So it was I was curious to see how we sort of relate to each other in terms of our professional work and also in terms of our creative process, but also in terms of space, of sharing a
Mhm.
space together, sharing a dinner table together each day, which happened in Garson. But I love all of them. We just got along so well, and it was so interesting for me. The first conversation I remember having with them, and we just casually asked each other what we were doing, and I had a very set idea of what I wanted to do in
Mhm.
Garson. And I expected the same from the other artists, but then it was interesting what everyone had a different way of entering a space. Like Cara, for example, had a beautiful body of work from before, which she was sort of getting an extension of in Garçon and sort of seeing how it plays out. Anna and Harold decided that they're going to just sort of settle and let the space decide. And Jimena was sort of also letting time sort of settle in. So each one had their own pace.
Mhm.
And I was sort of suddenly was comforted by the idea that there was no set way of entering this space.
Yeah.
And also we got along really well when we all got along very well surprisingly over ping pong,
Mhm.
which was the most surprising aspect for me because I didn't expect to come to Uruguay, Garçon, and play ping pong over the dinner table.
Mhm.
It so happened that Anna and Harold were creating a beautiful set of, outdoor spaces with ping pong at the center of it.
Mhm.
And even Kara did the same thing. So it sort of became an interesting way of relating to each other as well and playing, just to be able to play in that brief 2-3 hours of company that we have, as opposed to the solitude of that Garçon offered.
Mhm.
So for it was a really interesting mix to have both of them interplay. So I felt very grateful to have that sort of joyful, playful company with my very talented fellow artists.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, we also send them our love, and we're gonna have some conversations with them in the future. Very excited for them. to come. And on that space of lightness and a little bit of solitude, but also company, you also came with an idea of working with the kids in the school, at the School of Garzon. And this work was inspired by a question that you brought with you that later transformed. So I'm going to start with that question, which was, what do children remember of the past? And that was the idea that you arrived with. But soon you saw the things weren't as straightforward as you thought. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of taken for granted that in India you're surrounded by past, like you can go out of your door and you will see the past and a tradition, a practice that has been going on for thousands of years, like 1,000 years at least, right?
Mhm.
So you could hear sounds from your neighbors without even getting out of your house, a prayer, a sort of a practice that has been going on for decades or centuries. So I took it for granted that you're surrounded by the past. When I came to Uruguay, I was looking for indigenous culture, indigenous traditions, but I soon found out that a lot of it has been uprooted, and only fragments of it remain in disparate spaces.
Mhm.
So for me, that was sort of a surprise to me, and I didn't know how to deal with that. So the question reframed itself from what do children remember of the past to what of the past actually exists.
Mhm.
So, you know, for them to even remember. So I had to sort of pull back that
Mhm.
question a little bit further to understand what of the past actually remains. And I didn't have answers to that, obviously. And
Mhm.
so for me to come to a new space and to ask about what remains of the past was sort of a very ambitious question. And I had to ask that to children who were sort of very happy to be in the present.
Mhm.
You know, was sort of a very curious mix of how we engage with each other. So I think I didn't expect the uprootedness to be so grave. I didn't
Mhm.
expect the pieces of the past to be so missing.
Mhm.
But as I engaged with the children, I started to, it all sort of makes sense as to how it sort of remains. The way I expected the past to remain was very different from how it actually remains today,
Mhm.
which became the exploration later.
Mhm. And it all tied with our exploration at Campo from the last year's theme, which involved ancestry and the roots of the land. And this is a common history in Uruguay, that uprootedness, that nature of how we storytell in Uruguay, and sometimes the lack of references to the past, especially to the indigenous traditions, knowledges, histories. So that ended up transforming the work that you did with the kids, which was mainly a work of storytelling, of telling new stories and adventure themselves into the world of the unknown and the creative. So, what did you see in the kids? I know they were, so for people to have some context, they were working with Agustina Fernandez Rayo, which is a artist based in Montevideo, with the project of Garson in Focus, our project with the rural school, and they were working about ancestry, and there were already some lines, some ideas, many of them quite poetic, that you found yourself in, and then developed into this new narrative for the short documentaries that you did. So what were some of the things that you heard from the kids?
I think it was a great luxury to have for me to have Agustina's body of work with the same kids, the same canvas,
Mhm.
for over a year. And I did meet her just before coming to Garson, and we had a very engaging conversation. We really got along in terms of what we wanted to achieve with the kids, what we wanted to see, how we wanted to see the expression of the kids come out. And she sort of informed, I mean, she sort of gave me a sort of a heads up on how the kids are sort of very shy, very sort of held back together. And there needs to be a whole uh, modicum of trust that comes up, which happens everywhere. But say, for example, in India, if you put a camera in front of a kid, uh, you just put a camera anywhere, there'll be five kids jumping in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
almost instantly. You wouldn't have seen the kids till you put the camera there,
Mm-hmm.
so but here it was a completely different idea, but to sort of have that relationship that she built, and also all of the exercises that she had before, also inform my work greatly. So I'm very appreciative of what Agustina shared with me, and to sort of allow me to sort of also be a part of that story as well. One of the things that really, really moved me, and it still stays with me today, and it sort of influences my work even now, is this idea that came from one of her exercises with the kids. And one of the kids said, when you think of the past, there is no sound.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was sort of, it really opened up Garson for me, because Garson is filled with places that is sort of not being in use anymore. Like there is a railway station, but there are no trains that come. There is a bridge
Exactly.
which is broken. There is a mill that is not in use anymore. So there are a lot of spaces that are emptied out from a past that was once glorious, and now it's not there anymore. So when the kid said that, when that sort of line came through one of Agustina's exercises, it was sort of,
Mm-hmm.
and when she told me this, I was sort of really moved and really inspired by the depth of poetry that came from the kids. And also, this is something I could not have imagined myself. For me, the it's sort of, I'm always surprised by people and their ability for poetry. So when someone tells me something that I could not have written in 100 years, that for me is the most special things. And this line, I've heard it so many times in Spanish. I can't recall it right now. But it's such a beautiful line.
Mm-hmm.
You can say it if you can say it in Spanish.
The line would be El pasado no tiene sonido, which is
Yeah.
quite a deep sentence that oh God, this is English for me. This is hard. Encapsulates that of something that has been lost,
Right.
uh, that narrative that we cannot listen to because we don't know where it is located in the past. And maybe
Right.
the question is, okay, how do we then think our future? If we don't have that
Sure.
direct line with the past that informs the future, then
Right.
what is the relationship that we have with our future?
Absolutely.
So to
Yeah.
on that line, would you like to read some fragment, a small fragment of what then becomes that short film that you did with the material you collected with the kids?
Uh, I rather than read it, I think I would sort of do a disservice to what I would do is I would sort of give you senses of the stories that they gave me. So in the end, what happened was that I wanted the kids to imagine a mythology. So
Mm-hmm.
what I actually wanted them to remember the past, but when the past didn't exist, what changed was I wanted them to recreate a past.
Mm-hmm.
So that became the exercise. So we together we tried to do a myth, and they were out of the 11 kids who were there. We came up with around 7, 8 stories, and all in
Mm-hmm.
groups of two, groups of three, groups of four. But in the end, the stories in the film is basically me putting all of the stories together. So all I did was put the stories together, but the stories are so beautiful. For example, uh, it sort of all of it lent itself to nature. So,
Mm-hmm.
which made me realize that nature itself allowed uh, herself to sort of offered herself as the inspiration to the imagination of the kids,
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of an offering by nature where the past still exists, which came to the kids' imagination, which we could not, set on thinking and laying out rules and things like that. But for them, it was always a playground, and which came out in the stories. For example, there was a story of a dogs of their one of their dogs who died, who came back as flowers. So they reappeared as flowers, which is a very interesting line. There was another beautiful moment where an animal which has become very dear to me after coming to Uruguay, carpinchos, which
Mm-hmm.
I had no real experience with before that. The
Mm-hmm.
Carpinchos, there was a line which one of them wrote was the Carpinchos got uh, got violent. So one of them said the Carpinchos got violent and pushed away the people behind. So then another person, another kid, who I thought was not listening at all. So she came and told me that you got that wrong. You got the translation wrong. It's not the Carpinchos got violent, but the Carpinchos were angry. So
Mm-hmm.
I loved that distinction. I love the distinction between violence and anger, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's such a nuanced idea that the animals don't get violent, but they just get angry, you know. So it's such a acute observation. So I think that was one of the standouts. Some of the standouts were the themes of the stories that came out,
Mm-hmm.
from that exercise, which became the film in the end.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit more about the process of getting the kids to write their own script. Because I know when you first arrived, there was this distance. It was the first time they were meeting you,
Yeah.
and everything changed on the second day. So, how was that process?
Uh, I realized that my Spanish was rudimentary at best. It was the most basic thing ever, and of course, I took a month to get over how the double L sound of the sh, like you know,
Not.
tulisho, for example. I just couldn't get over it. But what I had to do was to show them how I could tell their stories. So we took
Mm-hmm.
one story. We took the first story. The first day we had a collective story, and then I went back quickly to La Gosanita, which is the little house that big little house that Heidi and Campo Garson offered me for the month, and I quickly created a small, like a minute and a half, using one of their voices, and I
Mm-hmm.
showed them that this is how a story could go. Like for example, there was a creature running on the ground. So I had the camera running on the ground, entering a door, going near the fireplace. So I had to sort of stimulate their imagination even further to say that nothing is, whatever story you come up with is going to sort of can be shown on film. That's the magic of film, magic of storytelling, that we can create whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, the film is so unexpected for me because 90% of the film is empty frames because the
Mm-hmm.
kids were shy. The kids were shy to be on camera. People around Gaston were not so comfortable being on camera. So I used a lot of empty frames and sound effects and movements and blurry figures, things that I would not have done before, but because of the limitations turned into possibilities, which I learned from the kids, right? So
Mm-hmm.
which I learned from how they were telling their stories.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a process of them telling me the story, me showing them the story back to them, and then to see how that sort of all played out, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it just became
And
an
we can see some
exercise of,
fragments.
sorry?
Go, no, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, it became an exercise of just playing with those, whatever stories they came and showing them back in film, how it sort of plays out.
Mm-hmm.
And that became the exercise every day. So I would show them something of their own expression in film, and they would be
Mm-hmm.
surprised by it, and they would sort of challenge me further with more ideas, which I would again go back to the drawing board and say, how can I show this? How can I show that? And that became our conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
rather than having a conversation in my bad Spanish, and them trying to go with trying to convince me of some ideas, but they were just telling me, I was listening, turning back the expression to film and seeing how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so filmmaking became the common ground, the common language for you to enter this experience together. And
Absolutely, absolutely.
for those who want to check some of those exercises, we have added some fragments on Campo's Instagram, but also we invite you to visit Naveed's Instagram and check some of this work with the kids and the work that the kids themselves did, which is just beautiful. Let's talk about what then became the short film that you started working for your collaboration with MAP, with the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore, which before coming to Uruguay, you had this idea of taking one of the pieces from their collection and connecting it with the narratives, the stories in Garzon. So, which was the piece that you picked, and how it connects with the stories that the kids create?
Right. I mean, I was at that time when I came last year, my big piece last year was to create 7 films, which was inspired by pieces of a collection of a museum in Bangalore called MAP, Museum of Art and Photography, Bangalore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used 7 pieces as a taking off point to see where I could take them in film, in ideas. So when I was going to Uruguay, I talked to the founder of MAP, which is Abhishek Podar, and I told him I'm going to Uruguay. All of the works that I chose were rooted in India or in South Asia, but I want to take this idea to Uruguay and see how it works. And he sort of encouraged me to take that idea further, because the whole idea of art is to sort of break these borders, break these barriers of how we see, how something relates to the other. So I took a work from a tribal artist called Jangar Singh Sham, a fantastic artist. I recommend you to look him up. So he created this beautiful piece where there is a snake serpent goddess who's holding the earth. And
Mm-hmm.
and if the idea is that if you poke the earth, or if you sort of play around with the earth, that sort of affects that sort of disturbs the snake, and the snake doesn't hold the earth anymore, and the earth crumbles, which is the
Mm-hmm.
great metaphor for today's day and age, where we are sort of plundering our resources, and we are experiencing climate change all across the world, in many, many different ways, right? So many different ways so it was sort of a very interesting experience to bring that idea to Garcon. And in the film, you could see, even before I could introduce the work to them, to the kids, which I did not do at all in the end, because they instinctively were looking at nature as the inspiration. So I didn't even have to introduce the work that is supposed to inspire the Uruguayan piece, because it already happened intuitively, because the kids were already experiencing it through the eyes of nature. So
Mm-hmm.
in the end, the film, thanks to Agustina's presence, also we got, and some of the kids also, two of the kids who were there, Vero, sort of came in the film. So there are only two. In the end of the film, you see two of the girls who are there, and they're in this beautiful field of flowers. And so the last shot is sort of her listening to a flower, so her listening to the flower. It's a direct relation, that direct idea that she's listening to whoever's holding the earth, whatever being is holding the earth, whatever entity, whatever you want to believe, whatever
Mm-hmm.
idea is holding the earth, she's listening to it. So the future listens to the past, is the whole
Exactly.
theme of the film, which is being said in one frame, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the last frame. Spoiler alert. But the idea is that the future listens to the past in ways we
Mm-hmm.
cannot imagine it, which was a big lesson
Mm-hmm.
for me as well in Uruguay, is that the way I understood listening changed, because the way I listened to the kids, if you look at the kids, they're all scattered, they're all running around, they're all sort of, they're all different age groups in Garson. So the kids who are like 11 in the class that I sort of engaged with, there were kids from between 7 to 14.
Mm-hmm.
And, so they were all different ages, different sort of maturity, different sort of, all sorts of different issues, different possibilities. But the way they all listened was not the way as adults, we imagine, like me and you listening to each other, us nodding, us sort of paying attention, but it is actually them being all over. but they're
Mhm.
actually taking ideas from what you're saying and reproducing them back in their own imaginations, which is fascinating for me.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, they were present, although for our contemporary standards, some would say they were not there. They
Right,
weren't paying attention. They were
right.
actually doing it. And so let's talk about the piece that you presented at Campo Artfest, which was actually called Future Ancestors. And then we go back to that idea of listening to the past as a way to understand how we move forward in our future. And how do we connect with the fact of that uprootedness of Uruguayan stories, but at the same time, the capacity that the kids had to connect with something that was beyond words, beyond stories themselves, right? It was extremely connected with their lived experience, with their relationship to their landscape, to their territory. So, what can you tell us about that piece, Future Ancestors?
Well, there were two pieces that sort of came out of that experience. It was sort of my collaboration was with Agustina, who also worked with the kids, and one of the ideas that came in her conversations with the kids, which I sort of really loved as well, was future ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And through my own explorations, that was exactly what was happening. And so I didn't feel the need to further articulate it. Future ancestors, futuros ancestros was perfect for me
Mm-hmm.
because the idea was that they are the future ancestors and they were sort of already laying the ground for the next generation, being kids themselves, which was so interesting for me to see. And so that piece was sort of using all of the ideas that even Agustina worked on over the year. And like, like for example, that beautiful line which said, in the past, there is no sound. So in the film, even for me, it was a very interesting moment in the little film that we show today, because sound has been a very important part of my filmography. So to use sound, to use ambient sound, to use music. So for me to suddenly remove that from a piece was sort of very empowering, to sort of suddenly remove sound. And it sort of came at the behest of a beautiful sentiment from an 11-year-old, right? So that was the inspiration. So it became removing that sound, sort of showing Garcon like how the kids saw it, where it is in complete silence.
Mm-hmm.
And then this idea of listening, to change the way you're listening to a space, to a people, and then everything appears. All of the sounds appears. Like for example, there is a story one of the kids told me about how the ghost of a horse that died gallops only when it feels love, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So she would listen to her field and she would hear the horses gallop and she knows the ghosts of the horses are in love, so, or the horses are in love. So it would became this idea that the way we listen, the way we interpret a land, a space has to change, has to be different. And that
Mm-hmm.
became the idea of the piece. And then when I started to look back or listen back to the recordings, I had a lot of audio recordings of the kids over 1 month. I met them numerous times, and the thing that they said the most, which missed me when I was there, was "tui show,"
Mm-hmm.
so which is you and I. So I was
Mm-hmm.
always, even though I thought I was always, they were not listening to me, in their words, which were always passing, sort of scattered, they
Mm-hmm.
always said "tui show," which is you and and I was always being included into that world, but I didn't
Right.
really realize it. It was scattered between many, many screams and many, many jumps and people, fighting with each other and making fun of each other, making fun of me, of my bad Spanish, all of that. In the middle, there is tuisho, 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 tuisho peppered. So
Right.
in the film, in the installation, it ends with 5 or 6 tuishos that is sort of being
Mm-hmm.
played. The idea is that if you really listen, me and you across the world, I'm from India, came to a little village in Uruguay. I was included, in the worlds of the kids who have been there for of their 10, at least 10 years, and they included me into their world in a matter of 2 weeks, or 2 days. Sorry, not 2 days. 2 weeks is an extension. 2 days. So I felt like that TUI show is why I do what I do, and right now that TUI show has become a part of my work moving forward. So even for me, future ancestors became an idea of my future work, which is to sort of draw these kind of connections, these kind of beautiful, meaningful connections that can be summed up in just 3 words, in a language I'm not familiar with, So right now, for example, I'm working in the Irish language, which I don't understand at all, but I know I'm getting building blocks of a story or pieces that move me, which is I don't realize yet. So it is, and I trust that process because of the kids of Garson. So that became one piece called Future Ancestor, which is also a tribute, sort of like an introduction to all of the beautiful work that Agustina did over the year with the kids. And the second piece was a portrait. She did a beautiful series of portraits of the kids, and
Yeah.
the portraits and the kids themselves being very shy. It took a long time for them to sort of be, comfortable with the ideas of themselves, with sort of the ideas of them being seen from a gaze of another. So that became an interesting point of view. And for me, it was very ambitious to try to recreate that in film, because they were already, Agustina had built this trust over a year with them. And even then, they were sort of, to see yourselves, even for me, it's sort of always sort of challenging, right? Even this is the first Instagram thing I'm seeing myself right now. It is confronting.
Believe it. But
but for me, in the end, the device I used was a very simple device in film, which actually seen as a mistake. Yeah, so I sort of changed the shutter speed for anyone who's into film. And it's what happens is that it's a mistake where your shutter speed uh, is not matching the frame rate, which is what it means is that whatever when I see you, you're blurry. If you move, you get more blurry. So we showed them, me and Agustina were together then. We sort of in the same classroom, and he said, the more you move to the kids, the more you move, the more we want to see you, because they didn't want to be seen in the traditional way. But when they saw, it's the first time in my life where I shot something and I immediately showed the kids right after the shot what I'm shooting, So and they were sort of the ideas of consent and the ideas of exchange of how we see each other was being happening in real time for us. And so but what happened was that some of them got really excited. They started moving a lot, which is how I saw them for a month, because they were constantly scattered, constantly alive, constantly jumping up and down, blurry figures. So my whole series of portraits became them as blurry figures, which for me also was a very special piece. So those were the two pieces briefly that I made with them and Agustina. Yeah.
And adding to that, if anyone wants to take a look at that piece where all of the kids are blurred, I think you published it on your Instagram, right? A piece
There
of
is a
it.
there is a small piece of that. This is just a
Yeah.
sense of that. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you want to get a sense of it. And adding to the first part of the work that you did, which also I think language is such an important part of that experience, not only with that moment of being lost in translation the first day, finding your food, finding your language with the kids, but also your experience, as you were telling us right now in Ireland, in which you're being confronted with a new language. I want to add to that experience. I want to read a small fragment of the work that you did, and I'm going to read it in Spanish. And then, of course, if you want to read it in English, please go ahead. This is translated by Cristina Pena, and it's part of the storytelling work that Naveed did with the kids. La pregunta que me hacía cuando llegué era, ¿qué recuerdan los niños del pasado? La exploración de Agustina reveló una observación asombrosa de uno de los niños. El niño dijo, el pasado no tiene sonido. Esta observación me abrió los ojos a un garzón cuyo pasado está en sordina, existiendo a plena vista. Luego vino una experiencia profundamente personal. Los niños me pidieron que escuchara. Los sonidos de garzón, presente y futuro, llegaron a mis sentidos. Un río que es la savia, fuego que es compañía para siempre, caballos al galope y horizontes infinitos que son libertad. Y el sonido de la escuela, que en principio puede sonar a caos, pero en realidad es un preludio clásico, como el preludio en que en mi menor de Chopin, también Garzón tiene muchos comienzos, comienzos a los que te invitan los niños. Sin saberlo, las palabras que más oí fueron tú y yo, which connects to everything that we've been discussing. So it's just very poetic
Uh,
for me.
that was beautiful to hear in Spanish, of course, and I think I'm going to go back to the two books that Heidi gave me about learning Spanish immediately after this because I don't think I remember much of what I picked up in Uruguay, but it was great to hear you say that in Spanish.
I'm glad. Yeah, I think it's just beautiful, and it encapsulates the whole experience. Uh, Getting to know the kids that at first can be a little wary of knowing one more stranger, but then easily having a connection with you through storytelling, through filmmaking, and then producing these amazing works that we've seen and that we invited every one of you to watch on Naveed's Instagram. Okay. Are you sure you don't want to give it a go in English? I'm not gonna pressure you. Just a tiny bit.
No, I think you summed it up quite well, honestly. I feel also I do want to say in terms of the space to use the space that was for the unfortunately I couldn't be there for the festival, but the space in which the films were shown, and I remember having this conversation with Dario and Agustina and about how the experience of the space is being shown and how the kids can see themselves in many different ways and many different perspectives, and to sort of show that expression of past and future and ideas sort of merging through just this beautiful ruined space that was there, which was very interesting for me also. So I wanted to just call that out as well. Yeah.
Exactly. And to all of the kids that worked with us last year, that are of course part of the what's the name of the things that appear at the end of a film? It's
The
the
credits.
oh God,
The
the
credits,
credits.
yeah. It's my most precious thing because in the credits section, because I also write, so I'm very possessive about my writing, but this is one of those films where in the end of the credits you see written by 11 names, very Uruguayan sounding names. There are these four names, so it's like uh, four Christian names, like one after the other. It's sort of populated with 11 kids' names, which for me is, I remember that seeing it when we were premiering in Bangalore. It was such a beautiful moment for me because I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it too. And then to start closing our conversation, I want to think about what happened after you left Garzon. How was that goodbye? And then almost, I think, 8, 9 years after, 9 years, oh my God, 9 months. You came here, it was very old. No, 8 months ago when you came to Garzon, uh, time has flew by. And what has stayed with you after all of these months?
I think what has stayed with me is sort of a sharpening of it's the stillness for me, because there is I remember having there was a routine that happened outside where I was staying, is that there would be a man with a horse exactly at like 9:30, and then I would hear him at 4 o'clock. There would be a lady with a dog. She would walk once to the store and back, and there were the kids who go to school at 9 o'clock, go back at 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So there was this sort of the life was so sparse in a sense, the way you would sort of experience it. that for me, the stillness in between sort of really made me appreciate, or sort of made me really listen to the little sparks of life that happened. So when it actually happened, I was sort of really uh, present, you know. So because otherwise, when especially coming from India, you have things jumping at you all the time, you know, which is I'm sure also true to Latin America, in the northern parts especially. But for me, it was sort of so interesting to sort of appreciate the stillness that sort of happened, and then the activity happening after that. So to sort of what I really left with is to this idea of being present, to really be
Mhm.
present in a space, in a time, in a place. So even when I went back to say Montevideo, and I would see so many people sitting and watching the sunset in the La Rambla, just on their own, and the sunset would take forever. You know, it was not a quick sunset, and it was sort of to really be present, and nobody was in a rush. Nobody wanted to leave. Nobody wanted to. So I really don't feel like I've left in a sense, because it's such a slow burn. Everything was so gradual. Everything was sort of so, it sort of you ease into it. So
Mhm.
I even usually when I leave, I wanted to go and tell the kids I'm leaving, and they were in school. I left in the morning. I remember we passed the school, but for the first time, I didn't do that because it was sort of I realized that the pace of even leaving is different, of letting go
Mhm.
is different, because you're sort of letting it sort of stay in. So for me, this might be the letting go of Uruguay, because I'm sort of reliving all of that. So I feel like to be really present and to sort of really uh, soften this idea of time is sort of what stays with me now. I
Mhm.
think that it's stillness and being present, basically. I think that's what I took away from Uruguay and Garcon especially, because when I was there, I was there, and when I left the place, wherever I was, that stayed with me. This idea of being truly present. Even though India tried to pull me apart from that idea, because India
Mhm.
is kind of frantic and chaotic and crazy.
Mhm.
But even in India, you can find stillness, and I could not really see that until I was in Garcon.
Mhm.
So to see those pockets, so for me, that's the most special thing, I would say. Yeah.
Mhm. I'm glad you couldn't have taken anything more valuable, more meaningful. And it's also super special that we're having this conversation while you are in rural Ireland, what a
Yeah.
word. I see the connections. I see how that can also give you some closure to this experience here. And we are so glad
Absolutely.
to have you here to had you in the past, and we hope to see you soon. Lots of success with your projects, with the films that you created in this time here and the other ones you collaborated with MAP. Thank you so much to the kids, to Agustina, to everyone involved, and to the people that shared with us this time today. Thank you so much. And that's it for
And
today. Thank you.
thank you for you as well. Thank you for this conversation, and thank you for
It
everyone
was a
listening.
pleasure. Nice to see you again. Abrazos. Chao.
Abrazos. Ciao.